Hey everyone, welcome back to the Real Talk Laz podcast. I'm your host Laz. This is an exciting day for us. Well, it's our fifth episode of the podcast. I'm super excited to have a longtime brother of mine, Preston, join us today and be our very first guest. So I'm honored, man. Thank you for coming along. I know it's been a long time coming for us as a friendship, a brotherhood. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to do this. And it's crazy, man. We've known each other for about 15 years. Time flies when you're having fun. um, and uh, and yeah, man. So obviously, I know a lot about you. I know a lot about your life and stuff. But for the viewers and the followers, I guess just give a quick rundown of who Preston is.
Yeah, no, first let me start by saying thanks, man. It's an honor to be here and it's a privilege and I'm glad we get an opportunity to talk about this stuff that really matters. So I'm proud of you and I'm happy for what you're doing and like I said, I'm honored to be here. Yeah, so Preston, 32 years old, turning 33 next month or next week. 15 years knowing you. It's crazy. Time does indeed fly. Um, I live in Washington D.C. area, Northern Virginia. I work in the aerospace sector, working with like autonomous vehicles and drones. But that's just one part of my life. I'm a full-time hockey coach on the side. I do Silver Patrol on the side. I'm married. I have a dog. He's a cute little corgi. That's really all you need to know. Those are the big parts. So
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, Roland's super cute. For those of you that don't know, and Jenny's super awesome, man, as well. Um, so cool, man. Well, hey, again, I can't thank you enough for being on here, and I appreciate it. So I guess we can kind of just
Mhm.
jump right in, if you're good with that. Um,
Yeah, absolutely, let's do it.
yeah. So I guess the first question is, and I'll ask is, what's something you've been through in life that most people wouldn't guess just by looking at you and seeing you?
Yeah. Well, first off, you gave me an opportunity to think really mindfully about the questions that you sent over to me that we're going to talk about today. And I think I wanted to give you answers that I felt were really impactful. And we're going to talk a lot, and I know you talk a lot in general about kind of vulnerability and being open and transparent. And, I'm going to try to do that today. And I think, you'll see through my answers and the things that I'm going to talk about that I think it's really important for men in general to learn how to be more comfortable doing this. And, it's funny, looking back, at our friendship specifically, you and I, we've stayed friends throughout all these years, and we've had our challenges and we've had things that we've had our conflicts and we've had our disagreements and stuff. But because we were able to communicate and we've been able to be transparent with each other, right? Like we were able to continue to keep that friendship going, right? So that's something that's very important and valuable to me.
100%.
But yeah, I mean, so something that I've been through, right? You know, I I think everyone's fighting things like deep down, right? Like I think we forget that a lot. The people that we pass by every day on the street, right? Like they all have their own stories, they all have their own insecurities, they have their own struggles. You know, we all we're all the main characters of our own lives. But I think we pretty rarely step outside of ourselves to kind of remember that guy who's like in the coffee chat line, or like the coworker or your best friend who's also kind of experiencing life in full color, right? Just like you and I. And for me, I don't think most people would guess that like someone like myself would carry a lot of mental baggage. But there are things that I've been through in my life that probably someone looking at me on the outside wouldn't guess, right? One thing is, I've mentioned to a lot of people, I was born 2 months premature. I had a lot of health issues. There was a lot of complications I had as a kid. And like little insecurities, right, that I went through when I was young, right? Like I was always the smallest kid in school. I wore glasses way earlier than anyone else. I thought my voice sounded weird. Like, you know, add all that up, and I constantly just kind of felt like the runt of wherever I was. Like I never really felt like I fit in the right way. And I was really social as a kid, right? Like I always wanted to connect with people. I always wanted to be super expressive. And that almost kind of made me feel like an outsider at times. I was always kind of too much for some people, um, you know, and I always wanted to engage and everything. And that sometimes got, I think, misunderstood. And I was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid, right? So at least that was kind of the early suspicion from doctors. So it wasn't something my parents were super excited about. It didn't get properly addressed or treated, and I didn't even get officially diagnosed with it until this past year, which is crazy, right? Because in hindsight, I think it explains a lot about who I am and what I've been through. So, and then add all of that up to the fact that I was a military brat, and then I moved around the country constantly. Every time I felt like I had finally found my footing socially, it was time to pack up and like move to a new town, move to a new school, move to a new social scene, like, and being an only child too, like that also added to this kind of feeling that I had to do everything alone, that I always had to rebuild, I always had to start over. It was exhausting as a kid, to be honest, right? And like, my parents, they did their best. They were great providers, and they made sure I had food and education and shelter, and they loved me. But being a provider isn't always the same as being like emotionally present. And there were moments where I think I definitely needed my parents, and I kind of got project managers instead. And all of that made me someone who grew up mentally in a lot of ways on my own. And it wasn't until college, when you and I met at Norwich University at military school, that I started to really feel like I had kind of this mental autonomy and that I could be myself for the first time. And that was the first place where I had like that kind of like-minded community, that structure, that like sense of identity, that place. And that's why for a lot of us, I know you feel the same way in a lot of respects. Like that school became home for me, and it's remained that way ever since, right? So, but that's a long-winded way of saying that I think when people meet me now, they probably see someone who's very outgoing. They see me as being like well-adjusted and happy, and I am, but I got here through a lot of silent battles, and I've had to wrestle with a lot of identity, confidence, belonging, and quietly over time, I've had to do that often by myself, and that journey has kind of made me who I am today. So
No, no, I appreciate that, man, and thank you for sharing that. And I think, though, out of the many pieces where I can relate, right? So, A, I'm an only child as well, as you know, right? And B, you touched upon a part where, like, similar to yours, like my parents were awesome, man. Like they provided a lot of great things for me, which at the time was awesome, and I didn't really understand what different was, if that makes sense. But your
yeah,
point of like the emotional side, right? I recognized later on in life, right? And I think Norwich too, because we were such an isolated environment, right? And going through all the craziness that we were going through, but where it really hit home for me was probably this like past year or two of my life where I've done a lot of reflection of like who I am and really digging deep of like who the hell am I, right? Am I just this person chasing an
yeah,
image, or like basing one part of my life as my whole identity? But realizing that like
yeah,
growing up, man, like yeah, my parents loved me and all that, but like that there was like that emotional piece where you wish you had that a little bit more, right? Especially as an adult,
yeah,
because for me, man, like it was like I hit 18, I went up to Norwich, and it was like, see you later, man. Like figure it out. Like we're here for you, but like you got to grow as yourself, and that's where I wish I had more of the emotional support. And I did, right? I don't want to recognize that I didn't, but I think the lack of at times, right? And maybe it's just my parents not understanding, right? Like what the hell I was going through, or really comprehending. But yeah, I
yeah,
could definitely relate to that. And similar as an only child, man, like there were things where like I just had to toughen it out myself, right? Like there was no one else, right? Like my parents,
yeah,
ripped me a new asshole for having a grade or whatever it was. Like all right, cool, man. Like, I'm gonna go upstairs to my room and look at the wall now, right? Because I have no one else to like share this with, right? Or like, as you get older, like your friends, you can somewhat relate, but like my childhood friends, man, like they had good parents as well, but like it was never the same, right? So I definitely feel you on that. I definitely know what that feels like, and I definitely can relate. And I think now as
Yeah.
adults, we start to realize more from our childhood. Now I know you and I are both, dog parents, right? But one day I think as like, whether we do have kids or not, but just being able to recognize those like all the goods, but then also the areas of opportunity where we can hone in on that for our future generation. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes along with like you just want to you find new ways to be present, right? Like I know when I have kids in the future, if that is something in my future that happens, it's something that it's taken me years to think about my childhood and think about like the experiences and the way that I grew as a kid, and it's taken a long time to like to understand that fully and like really evaluate the goods and the bads, and that just comes along with growth, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
something like you're not gonna look back on your childhood when you're in your early 20s and inherently know where you could have done better or how you could have handled certain situations differently, and that takes time, and it happens differently for everybody, right? I mean, you can't compare yourself to others, and but yeah, I mean, as an only child and as someone that you don't have, especially for, and again, this is unique to me, right? But like, moving around a lot, being a Navy brat, right? Like, there's so many things that when you're experiencing puberty and you're like growing up and you're like becoming a young adult, you want to be able to like bounce a lot of that emotion and like idea and like those thought process off of someone. And a lot of times you don't want that someone to be your parents.
yeah,
Like, your parents are your parents, right? Like they can't be everything to you emotionally and like socially, right? And so unfortunately, like that kind of is the reality because they are the only people that are like super present all the time, right? You don't have a brother or sister that you can like bounce stuff off of. So, but yeah, it for sure it's one of those things where Norwich and going to college and being in kind of that like isolated environment up in New England, like that was definitely like the first time in my life where I was able to like really just focus on what I wanted to do and grow into the person I wanted to become. So
yeah, awesome, cool. And I guess to shift gears, you know, I know you touched upon a lot of valuable and good topics, but I guess was there a moment in your life where you realized like, hey, I can't keep holding all this in, right? All this weight or holding all this weight, and something had to shift.
yeah, so like I've been open about this for a while now, and I bring it up with friends and family, and I've tried really hard over the years to be a kind of ally for people that are going through it. But that moment for me, it came really hard and it came really fast. And it was right after one of the best times in my life, right? And so, and that's where like I think my experience is unique in the sense that I think there's a lot that people can take from it. For me, life, when I moved to Northern Virginia like 8 years ago, life was really great. I met my now wife, Jenny. We got married a couple years ago. We were planning our future, and I was doing great at my job, and I had a lot of hobbies, and I was athletic, and I was going to the gym, and I was lifting, and I was doing all the things I thought you know successful people do. And I think it was like a month after I got married, I started having some really strange like medical symptoms where I had health stuff that like just wasn't making sense. And it was like it came out of nowhere. Like I was literally in a different country. I was in Finland on my honeymoon for New Year's, and I started having like almost instantly, randomly out of nowhere, panic attacks, dizziness, like brain fog, negative thoughts. I had a lot going on that was happening inside my head that I couldn't explain, and it was really, really tough. I would, it got to the point, it was so bad, like we cut our honeymoon short. I came home, and I went to the hospital. They couldn't figure it out. I went to three different neurologists, and it took three to finally figure it out. And it was a 6 month long battle that I went through, and I spiraled through that whole thing. I thought I was going to lose my job. I started having those thoughts of like, dude, I just got married. Like, I just became a husband, and now I'm already becoming a burden to the person that has committed to spend the rest of their life with me, right? Like everything I felt like I had worked really hard to build over the last couple of years, like everything was slipping away because of something going on in my head that I couldn't explain, right? And I started getting depressed, and I started, I was it was becoming super super tough to explain what was going on. And on top of all of that, I had my career, that I was working for a really great company at the time. Like I wouldn't be where I am in my career without this this organization that I was with. But unfortunately, the reality was that it was kind of a mom and pop organization, and there was a lot required of everyone in that organization. And I don't think that there was a lot of understanding from the people that I reported to that they didn't do a good job of realizing just how bad of a mental situation I was in. And that also added to the stress, right? So like on top of everything else, the people that are responsible for my livelihood and giving me a paycheck, like they don't get it. Like they just refuse to like understand. And so finally, after like months and months and months of trying to figure this out, I got diagnosed with anxiety. Like that's really what it was, like out of nowhere. And it wasn't something that like I was expecting. It wasn't something that I had like a family history of. It wasn't something that like I could have prepared for. It was like, hey, you just like either some combination of like you getting older or you know something in your brain flipped the switch or whatever. Like for whatever reason, I got diagnosed with that. And this whole like kind of new weight hit me, right? Like now I wasn't just dealing with symptoms anymore. Like I was confronting, now I had this like stigma of being someone that like has a mental health condition, right? So like, I obviously I got on medication, I started taking antidepressants, and like it helped and it has helped, but again, now I have this like huge intense identity crisis, right? Where like now I'm becoming that person that like I think a lot of men in general fear becoming, right? Like I become that person that's like now I'm the one who needs help, right? Like oh I have to be on antidepressants, and like I should probably go to therapy and talk to someone. And like I didn't want to become that guy who like didn't have it all together, right? And in growing up, I think, and you could probably relate, like especially as a guy, as a man, right? Like you're taught in a lot of environments, and even places like Norwich, right? Like you're taught that things like this are weaknesses, right? Like you're taught that you just have to push through, and like you have to tough it out, and like you don't need help. And yet here I was, like I needed help. Like I needed to have this self awareness to go and like ask for it. And honestly, dude, like I look back on like the the symptoms and the things that I was experiencing before I got that help. Like I mean, I was a very happy go lucky. I've always been a very like positive individual, and there I was like a couple months into this debacle, and like I was like, dude, I get it now. I understand why people who go through these kinds of things decide to end it, right? Like, and that's a really like scary, eye-opening experience where you know, you're finally in a position where you can mentally understand how someone could get to that point. And until you experience that, it's hard to put yourself like perspective wise into like oh I would never I'd never kill myself, I'd never commit suicide, I've never even entertained that thought. And I didn't necessarily during that really tough time, but I did kind of tell myself I get it now a little bit, like I understand why.
Yeah.
I think the saving grace for me during this whole thing was like honestly it was my wife and like a few of my close friends and the people that gave me the space to talk, right? Like actually talk, like no judgment, no advice, like just give me the space to talk about it, right? And I had to be super vulnerable with them, right? And it was really scary and it was terrifying, and but it was also this kind of really freeing moment in my life too, right? And I think that experience taught me a lot about what I think every guy needs to hear. That I unfortunately went through a situation where I had to wait until life shattered a little bit to be vulnerable, and I don't think you have to wait until there's a crisis to give yourself permission to talk about it, right? Like, the truth is that I think for a lot of us, we don't learn that lesson until it's really late. And I found a way to be open and come out about it because I was forced to. But now looking back, I think I just wished I had learned sooner that, like, if you can be vulnerable, it can actually be a strength. It's not a weakness. And that's something that I think a lot of us just unfortunately learn too late. And that's where you see, unfortunately, men struggle to the point where, it becomes too much. And yeah, it was a really tough moment in my life, and I've for the most part I've gotten through it, and I still have good days and bad days and whatnot, but I'm still here, and
No,
that's really all that matters. So
no, absolutely, man. And obviously, I'm very, you know, beyond words happy that you're still here, and I appreciate you for sharing that the vulnerability piece, right? I think a couple things. Number one, um, just even on vulnerability, right? I think to your point, a lot of us didn't want to accept that, right, as a factor, and just keep
yeah,
pushing through. Like, so for example, similar, right, in the sense of when I got married, I was my worlds were clashing, right, by two, and what I mean by that is, on my one side, my parents had just gotten divorced, right, so like a year prior to getting married, my parents just got divorced. So here I am, engaged to Sam. We're about to, you know, embark this next chapter and next evolution in our life of marriage. And the year prior, I'm fucking breaking down because my parents got a divorce, right? And at the time, I was, I don't know, late 20s, right? Give or take. And I remember someone asked me, they're like, hey, would you have rather your parents get divorced when you were a little kid or as an adult as you are now, and how would that make you feel, right? And honestly, the question was I didn't know, right? Because I didn't know either way to come with its own struggles. But I think as an adult, and even with the mindset that I had back then, that things are just meant to be brushed off, like I was pretty impacted by it, right? And then here I am, right in the next hand, like about to start this beautiful chapter with Sam, and I'm like carrying all these weights, right, and my shoulders, and I felt like I just couldn't be 100% and give that to her, right? Which she very well deserved, right? So I can relate and understand how you felt with that, with just starting your marriage and then having something weigh you down on top of that, right? And then I think the second point too, like going back to Norwich and like all the stuff that we went through. Obviously, it's a military college, so there's a lot of mental, right, especially during your rookie year, as we went through. You and I were both part of drill company, right? So we went through our own additional, right, indoctrination, if you will, and training. Um, but looking back at it now, like even when I just went back for my MBA, and I know you've gone back for your advanced degree there too, but like you start to realize, like at least when we were there back in like 2010 to 2014, not that I can remember, but like I don't remember if there was like any help, right? Like if there was like any like guidance counselors or things like that where like you can like I know we had the rev, right, so like rev, but like some people, for example, may not believe in religion, right, or may not even know that was an option, right? So I started to think, like, dude, like we went through some crazy ass shit there, and we were just taught, to your point earlier, like showing any sign of like vulnerability or weakness, like it was just not appropriate, right? And it was just like, hey, push it through. And that's where I think my life was like taking that mindset. Like even though I was going through a bunch of shit in my life, during Norwich, post Norwich, and pretty much up to date, but like compartmentalizing things and just pushing them down, down, and down until one day, dude, like just like burst, right? Like it was
yeah,
2020, it was the pandemic, where I think A lot of us also just struggled with that, right? I know me being in an office full time and then pretty much being a remote worker since the pandemic, like that shifted my mindset. So, but it took me a while to recognize and understand, like, hey, something's off, man. Like, I need to talk to somebody. I need to just put my ego aside, right, and talk to someone. So I did therapy. I did therapy for a while until I felt like I had enough mental capacity to dissect what my therapist has taught me, right, and then be able to apply that
Yeah.
myself, right, in the world. Because like everything doesn't last forever, and a therapist isn't going to be at my side or disposal at every time, right? So I had to
Yeah.
truly dissect everything I've been taught and apply that myself. But I think the last point I know is a bit winded too, but like man, like we all go through it all, right? There's a lot of pressure on us from personal pressure, cultural pressures, right? And just the real world itself. And I know it, man. And we're both men, so we can relate to that, right? But like people do a really good job of hiding it. At least they think, right? But the whole point of this is like, dude, put the fucking guard down, man. Like, just be yourself, like
Yeah.
open up. Like at this point, like I'd rather hear about a million men's different stories, right? Than have to go to something more serious about that person when in reality they could have just opened up to someone. And I get it, man. It's
Yeah.
a lot easier said than done. I know it, right? You know it, but
Yeah.
what I know now is I wish I would have done it sooner, right? I think that's my biggest point in life. Like I wish I would have opened up sooner. I wish I would have taken that step sooner because it would have just helped me sooner, right? And not only me, but like everyone
Yeah.
around me. Because if I'm in a shit mood, obviously no one else is gonna get rainbows and butterflies, right? Like, and that's the reality of
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah. It's like it's funny because like I think about Norwich a lot in that capacity too, where like, we did go through some crazy stuff and like, it's a military school, right? Like I think for those listeners that are hearing this podcast and maybe you didn't go to a military school, but like, the standard stereotypical military stuff happens, right? Like there's hazing and there's yelling and there's screaming and there's, really hard days and hard nights and long and, all the above, right? Like, but what's funny is like I think there's a balance, right? And it's like, yeah, like Norwich taught me a lot of great things about how to, approach life's challenges and like push through and like, be courageous and like, just, at the end of the day, there are parts of your life that you have to just, you have to suck it up and get through it, right? But it's like, I one of my biggest pet peeves, right, is like I hear, older alumni or I hear people that are like, oh, like military schools have gotten soft and they've gotten all this other stuff. And it's like, in my opinion, right, again, it's a balance. You need to be able to have, someone makes you do a lot of push-ups or, you get absolutely physically drained and then you have to go to class and like I love all that. Like keep doing that, right? But at the same time, teach mental resilience, teach mental strengthening, and teach all the things that are gonna make you mentally tougher. And sometimes that mental toughness comes with vulnerability and being able to talk about it, right? Like I didn't personally like get physically injured at Norwich, right? But like, yeah, did I get hazed a little bit every now and then? Like, yeah, sure. But like, how awesome would it have been if like I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it was fun, right? But like, it would have been cool if I had like had an outlet to talk about it. Like,
yeah,
like give me a chance to talk about it, not complain, not like let that ruin my experience, but just like have an opportunity to chat about it and like work through it mentally, and then I'll go back and like like that's something that from my perspective when I think about what are the purposes of those schools and what are they meant to build, like whether you're in a corporate environment or if you're on the battlefield, you want mentally tough, mentally resilient, mentally like strong people. And physicality can only get you so far, right? Like you can be as strong, you can deadlift and bench and you can do all the Simplify Society stuff. Like you can do all that for as much as you want, right? But at the end of the day, if you can't process emotion and you can't process mental like challenges appropriately, it's gonna be detrimental not only to yourself but like to your battle buddies, to the people that like rely and count on you as a leader, right? So yeah, it's crazy. And one last thing too that I think is interesting, like I think one of the moments, if we talk about Norwich, that like I think is something that happened recently that kind of opened my eyes, right? Is like life isn't fair. Like, you know, a lot of things are going to happen in your life that you can't prepare for, right? I remember a couple years ago hearing that one of our classmates passed away. His name was Chris Zolli, and he had gotten cancer in like the craziest place, and like they found it super late, stage four, boom. Within a couple of months, he was dead, and it's like this was like the weirdest kid in our class, right? Like he was like the strangest dude. He was like he was just an odd fellow. And like I never would have thought that like he would be the first person that like of our like cohort of friends and like group, right, that would like pass away or something like that, right? And I remember that hit me really hard because I was just like, man, like I wonder if I knew back then if I knew that like he was gonna be gone that quick. Like I wonder if I would have maybe approached my friendship with him a little differently, or I wonder if I would have like interacted with him a little bit differently. I don't know that, but at the end of the day, like that was something that hit me where I was like, "Fuck!" Like he's gone. See ya. Like,
Yeah.
and you know, I'll go to alumni weekends and I'll never see him again. And that's like, you know, we weren't super close, but it's still something that weighs on you, right? It's still like, man, like that can happen to anybody.
Oh yeah. And I think too, man. Like as we get older, right, and your perspective starts to change, and you start thinking of like areas of where you may have done better or could have done better, right? Like this scenario with Zolly, dude, I was fucking shocked, man. I was like, um, and again, right, Zolly was unique in his own way, right? And I think learning what
Yeah.
I know now, right, as just a person, I think having him the opportunity to maybe just see him differently, right? Maybe we would have understood kind of his own unique way, right? And
Yeah.
why he was the way he was, right? And then similar to that, dude, like speaking about this, and I don't want to do a rabbit hole down this, but like, dude, even Torres, man, like, when Torres passed away from like a freak
Yeah.
nature car accident, right? Like, you're like, holy shit, like, dude, like for me, Torres, right, was, just crazy, right? I remember like my our junior year or maybe our senior year, like Torres was 2 grades younger, or maybe the grade younger than us. But
Yeah. I think
he,
he was a year behind.
yeah, like he came to my house, dude, with my family. And like his parents flew him up from Texas, so like he stayed in New Jersey for a couple days, and then we drove up to Vermont together, and obviously very close to us in Droll, right, and being on shock. But dude, it's just crazy, right? Like all these little things, like you start to put perspective, like yo, like that place surely, like if you don't talk to someone, and I get it, like even you and I, for example, we don't talk every day, man, and that's completely fine. But when we do talk, we
Yeah.
always maximize it, right? Or when like you and Jenny, for example, stayed at my house, right? Like we maximize the time we have together, and then life goes on. And I know that's something you and I have to work on, is maintain that relationship. But like you start to lose, like man, like these people start passing, or whether it's just life or mental health battles, right? I mean, it's crazy, right? To say the
Yeah.
least. But yeah, it's perspective is a big thing. Um, so, and then I guess just kind of move things along and keep things going. But obviously, I know you've shared about your experience with like your diagnosis with like anxiety, right? Your childhood and everything since being married and all that. So now you've identified everything, right? You know what's going on, right? You can now take action, right? So when you started to essentially work on your mental health, right? Like, what does that look like to you? Were there maybe any outlets you went to, or things along that nature?
Yeah. And it's a great question. I think the like the kind of the first thing to say is like I think like everyone needs to understand and everyone needs to like conceptualize that like mental health and how everyone approaches it, it's not a one size fits all journey, right? Like everyone experiences this in their own way. What it looks like for you is going to be totally different for me, right? some people are, and I think a lot of this comes from, in my opinion, I think a lot of this stems from self-awareness. Some people are super self-aware from a really young age, and some people get, shaken into self-awareness because of a tragedy, right? Like a close friend dying, or a family member passing, or someone getting hurt, right? And then some people don't figure out until super late in life, right? Sometimes, and that's okay. Like, that's perfectly fine. But I think for me, it wasn't just like a singular moment. I think like the concept of working on my mental health was something that was a kind of a slow build up of realizing, and we talked about this earlier, just how noisy the world has become over the last like decade, right? Like how easy it is to kind of lose yourself, and your sense of self in this world that we live in now, where you have, everyone's constantly comparing themselves to others, right? There's all this political chaos. There's this digital overload of like, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, like all of this, right? And especially us, like if you think about it, like us in our 20s, we're experiencing all of that during the period of our life where we're expected to like actually transition into adults. And so like everyone's like shouting into this void, trying to be heard, trying to show like in our 20s, our mid to late 20s, like, oh, well, like, I'm valuable, and I have something to contribute to society, and, I matter, and this is why I matter, and listen to me. Like, it's super easy to feel overloaded, and feel kind of like aimless, and like wander around aimless kind of thing. And so I started asking myself, I think probably in my late 20s, I started asking myself, like, what grounds me about my life, right? Like what is actually something, what are the things that like legitimately bring me joy, that bring me purpose, that give me creative outlets? Like, how do I feel like I actually contribute? And I started leaning into those things much more intentionally over the last probably 4 or 5 years, slowly but intentionally. And over time, I started realizing like I don't have to be super super good at one thing, and I don't have to be, someone that is involved with a ton of other things. Like, I just have to like singularly focus on the things that bring me happiness, right? So like I started coaching and writing about ice hockey, and that became a huge part of like my life, and that was a big creative outlet for me. I started volunteering and doing like the Civil Air Patrol stuff. Like, that gave me kind of that sense of serving and like giving back. Gave me kind of that structure that we kind of, probably miss about some place like Norwich. And then I started putting, I think, a lot more intentional effort into my own personal relationships, right? So being a good husband, being a good friend to those that are around me, being a little bit more present and open with my parents. Like, that's another thing too that I think a lot of us forget, right? Like, for me and you as only kids, I only saw my parents as one way. And I realized in my late 20s, I was still treating and viewing my parents the same way I did as when I was a kid. And so that's something that I think, again, mentally, and as we grow, you have to shift. You have to be able to, okay, well, my parents are getting older, and I'm getting older, and I have to start treating them like adults too, not just as my parents, right? So all of this like is cascading into, a lot of things that you're trying to be intentional about, and it's tough, and it's hard to kind of grasp it. But I think everyone goes through that. Like I said, I think everyone goes through this, very differently. And I think for me, after my medical issues, I didn't really have a choice but to start taking my mental health seriously. And that whole period rewired how I went about my emotional well being. I realized that, taking care of yourself is a lot more about being aware of the people around you and tuning in emotionally to your environment. And I think my self awareness, and the self awareness that, everyone should work on, is going to make people more empathetic. It's going to make people more patient. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what working on my mental health looks like for me. It's small, consistent, daily efforts. It's focus. It's mindfulness. It's also giving myself, a little bit of grace when I have really shitty days. Like, kind of repeating that life mantra that, like, just because today is hard, that doesn't mean I'm failing. Like, if I have a bad day, it doesn't mean that I'm a shitty person, or, I'm a failure or something like that, right? It just means I'm a human being. Like, and we all probably need to be a lot better at giving ourselves that kind of like daily grace of like, hey, you're not going to be perfect all the time. You're not always going to grow every single day. Like it's unrealistic. And yeah, I think that's kind of what it looks like for me and what it's been like over the last couple of years. So
Yeah. No, that's great, man. I think if there was a playbook in life on mental health, we'd probably all be masters of that, right? But there isn't, right? Because everyone's journey is so similar in a sense of going through the mental toughness, right? But so different, right? Because what may be impactful to me may not be impactful to you, or vice versa,
yeah,
right? And to touch on one of the points that you mentioned earlier, so you know, comparison is the biggest thief of joy and happiness, right?
yeah,
And dude, it took me a long time too to realize that, right? I'm not gonna lie, that shit was hard, right? So, coming out of Norwich and having like fucking nothing, right? Because we didn't have a commission, right, at the end of the tunnel, right? At least I didn't have a job, right, lined up after college, right? And so for me, like, here I am just trying to do whatever it takes to earn some income, right, and find myself while still kind of holding on to this identity of like the whole Norwich mentality, right, of like who I am, and even being on the East Coast and like New Jersey, like I thought, like, dude, this will be easy fit, man. I fucking went to Norwich, like people are gonna respect me and all this shit, and like the first couple of job interviews, I'm like, yeah, I went to Norwich, so like, okay, like they didn't understand like all this stuff like that it
yeah,
entailed, right? So for me, that was kind of a reality check too, right? But then also too, man, like just seeing people that were maybe a little bit more successful than I was, right, earlier on, right, and leveraging their social media platforms to showcase that, right, whether it was like the new car or hey, they've got a house, right, or hey, we've got kids now, right, you name it, like everyone's so quick and to post all the good, right, and no one reflects on the challenges that went through it to get that, if anything, and we compare ourselves to the 25-year-old or the 30-year-old, right? And it's like, well, when's my time going to come, right? So I can definitely understand and know how that feels because that's how it was for me personally too. For the longest time,
yeah,
and kind of like leading me to like always searching for like the next thing, right? To provide that happiness, and I kind of realized that when I'm like, okay, well, here I am. I'm married to my wife now. Things are going great. We finally settled down. We bought a house. We live in a great area, all that good stuff. We're both well in our careers, successful, but it's also like I was still kind of chasing the next thing, right? To have that feeling. And for me, that's kind of why I went back to school, right? Because I felt that I needed to accomplish something else to feel happier, when in reality, I just needed to dig deep to see who I really was, right? And then I got my degree, and then I was like, oh shit, well, now what? And then that's when I realized that, like, I had to kind of focus on myself more, and prioritize myself, which kind of led me to creating this channel, right? And being here and just leveraging this as a twofold, like kind of an outlet for myself, but then also a platform for people like all my followers, right, and yourself to just understand and realize that like what you're thinking is something that I'm thinking. What you're feeling, you're not alone, right, and things along that nature. So, um, but again, easier said than done, right? For sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like, so like two quick points to like what you just mentioned. I think like you and I are similar too, right? Where like I grew up in a Navy family and I went to military school and I was like, man, I'm gonna go into the military and that's gonna be my life. Like that was it, right? Like I had convinced myself for years growing up like that was gonna be my career and I was all for it, right? And then
Yep.
I didn't get a commission. I didn't have the best grades in undergrad. Like, I tried to enlist after college and I had a medical disqualification. So like very quickly my whole world got turned upside down and it's like life was just like JK, like that's not it's not you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's always being able to like how do you adapt, how do you move, How do you move forward even when you're presented with these challenges, right? And like I went back to grad school. I worked for Norwich, and I found myself in the higher education industry, and that was kind of a means to an end for me, right? And like sometimes you have to be able to be aware, like maybe the journey I'm on right now isn't exactly the best, but it's gonna hopefully get me to where I want to be, right? Like I spent 4 or 5 years in higher ed, and I knew I didn't want to be in that anymore, and eventually that was able to help me get to my next career field, which is where I'm in now. And I'm definitely a big believer that like everything that you experience be can help you get to the next step, right? And like at the same time, what's funny is like all of my experiences, the way I view kind of like my mental health and the way that I view the world around me is like it's so funny, like I feel myself getting old now when I like talk about this, but like I work at one of the four biggest like consulting firms in the world. I work at Deloitte, and it's full of like your exceptional undergrad kids that come out of college, right? That went to like Georgetown and Harvard, and like all these kids that like it's a hard, people joke that like Deloitte is like the Harvard of the corporate world, right? It's really hard to get into and all this other stuff, and it's like I see these kids that are like 23, 24 years old, and their whole mindset, their whole focus is like, man, I want to climb the corporate ladder. I want to kiss as much ass as I can. I want to do this, that, and the other, and I'm gonna work 70 hours a week, and I'm gonna blah 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 blah. And it's like I find myself oftentimes looking at these kids and being like, dude, just enjoy the fact that you work here. Like take a breath and just be happy with the fact that like you have this opportunity. Don't stress yourself out about it to the point where like it ruins your whole life, because you're gonna get a negative experience of this place if you do that. Like sometimes in life I feel like we all take things so seriously, and it's like you don't need to do that all the time. Like yeah, there's a time and place to lock on and be professional and stuff, right? But like also be your true self, right? Like that's something about in today's like modern corporate culture that I really hate is like, I think you could probably see it with your organization too, right? Where like you probably have people that are like totally different people in the workplace versus when they're out of the workplace. And 99% of us, we love who we are outside of the workplace because that's where we find all the things that we love and enjoy in our passions and our hobbies, but yet we spend all of our life, most of our life in that workspace, right? So like I kind of had that like realization a couple years ago where I was like, I should like just be yourself in the workplace too. Like, and if people aren't okay with that, like then those are not the type of people you want to necessarily work with, or like you adjust to how you work around those types of people. So I have tried to make that big step for myself too in my professional career, where like I make a joke with all my friends at work. I'm like, yeah, I work in aerospace and I do the drone stuff, but like at the end of the day, like I'm really just a hockey frat bro that like found his way into the tech space. Like
Yeah.
that's really all it is. Like that, but I'm okay with that. Like I'm self aware enough to know that like I don't wake up in the morning and I think, oh my god, like I can't wait to make PowerPoints today. Like it's gonna be so exciting. Like no one does that. Like
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, if I can bring a little bit of myself and I can bring a little bit of my authentic self to my workplace, like that just makes me a little bit happier. It makes me a little bit more like mentally sound and focused. And I think more people should do that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think too, like a lot of people, including myself too, for the longest time, like we let our work kind of identify as who we are, right? When in reality it should be the opposite, right? So like we identify as our own personality, right? And that's what makes us all unique, right? Whether you're bubbly, whether you're funny, whether you're the serious guy, whatever that may be as you, like that's who you are, right? But to your point of like
Yeah.
putting such a show, right, for the 9 to 5ers, and then like, there's that meme out where it's like, going to your 9 to 5 and then to listen to like some crazy old school hip hop music, and then at like 9:01 they're like suit and tie buttoned up, right, like all professional. And I get it. There's a
Yeah.
happy medium, right, of level of professionalism and courtesyism. But like a few years ago in my last company, that's where I struggled with. Like I had to be on this pedestal always of like identifying as this company only, right? And like that was it. Like that was my whole mentality. And I started to realize that my personality was shifting, right, just to fit in.
Yeah.
And when I left there, I knew that wherever I landed next, right, that my personality was going to be the front of who I was, right? Whether it was good, bad, or
Yeah.
indifferent, like that's who I was, right? So fast forward here, I've been here for about 4 years now, one of the largest aerospace and defense contractors, right? And that's what kind of stemmed to my success, man. It's just my personality, like. And there's the people on the team
Yeah.
which are super bubbly, great, nice personality, right? And then there's others that are here just to do their job, and that's okay. But I think the biggest, I guess, message is just be who you are, man. Like, stop trying to mold yourself for someone else. Which ultimately, as
Yeah.
crazy it is, like you're the only one that's going to sacrifice and feel it because Tom, Dick, and Harry up in corporate, they're not going to care or feel right
No.
the difference because they just see you as number three or whatever, right? And at the
Right.
end of the day, you're the only
And
one sacrificing and feeling that emotional like restraints, right? But yeah, it's again easier said than done. But I definitely understand it because I've seen those people for sure make their whole life their job, and it's like, dude, like yeah, it's your job. It's 9 to 5 or whatever hours you may work at, but like you also have a life too. And after a while, you're gonna fall
yeah.
into like this like hamster wheel of just like the grind, and then you're gonna wake up years later like, yo, who am I? You know?
I mean, like the grind itself and like the like people joke about how like, oh man, I got to do this for 40 years before I retire, and then I'm gonna be old and not be able to enjoy it. It's like that alone is exhausting in and of itself. So like, why not try to like make it a little bit easier on yourself, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
and like you said, it's a balance, right? Like, I'll give this one last example, and then we
Hmm.
can we can go to the last question. But um, like when I go to into the office, right, and I wear a nice shirt, a blazer or something, right? Like I have this like fun tradition with myself where like I always wear a different pin on my blazer, like my blazer collar. And some days it's a Norwich pin, some days it's a CAP pin, some days it's I do this like hockey blog stuff on women's hockey, right? And sometimes it's like a women's hockey logo, some pin or something like that, right? And like
Yeah.
just that little bit of like individuality, right, can lead to a conversation in an elevator, and before you know it, like people are talking to you about whatever that is, and then they start opening up, and it's like that, like for all you know, that could have made their whole day, right? Like it's little things like that where, if you find ways to kind of bring your authentic self into your environment and into your workplace, like you don't have to find yourself putting on a face anymore, like,
Yeah.
and that can relieve a lot of stress.
Yeah. At the end of the day, man, people want to relate, especially in these people centric or people focused jobs, right? Like you and I are very customer facing, very people facing. Like, dude, at the end of the day, like you just want to relate to somebody, right? Because that
Yeah.
relatability can shift someone's whole day, shift someone's whole mindset, and maybe calm their nerves, right? Their anxiety as well. But yeah, I think we can do a whole podcast on workplace culture in itself. But
Yeah, probably.
but yeah, man. Well, cool. So listen, I know we've talked a lot of great stuff. I think just to kind of wrap it up with the last question here. I know we've talked about our childhood briefly, right? But like, if you can go back, in some crazy time machine, which I'm surprised hasn't been built yet in this world, but maybe with flying cars, we'll get that. If you can go back and talk to your younger self, what would you tell little Preston back in the day?
Yeah, no, I had to think hard about this one. Because it took me a while to like figure out how I want to answer, but um, I think like hypotheticals like this are pretty interesting. I think they're fun to think about. I try not to dwell on them too much. I I think I genuinely believe like, and I kind of talked about this earlier, where like I think everything I've experienced in my life, the good, all the bad, the confusing, the strange, um, like it's all really shaped me into who I am today.
Yeah,
I think if I did have the chance to talk to my younger self, I think I genuinely probably wouldn't tell him to change a whole lot, right? Like I think, I'd probably say, try to be less self-centered at times. Like I think when we're young, we naturally and obviously are pretty selfish. So I would try to instill the fact to be maybe a little bit more emotionally aware of others a little bit earlier than I did in life. But I think, I wouldn't take away the struggles. I wouldn't take away the challenges I've had. I wouldn't take away the tough times I've had because I think they all taught me something different, right? And that's how I got resilient. That's how I learned perspective. Life is going to throw some really serious curveballs, and everyone has a different at bat. Metaphorically speaking, and you're not always going to see the pitch that's coming at you, right? And no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to control what happens, and you can control the only thing you can't control is you can control how you respond, right? And you can
Yeah,
control the type of man that you want to become, and you can control the type of husband or boyfriend or employer or whatever, right? It's up to you to choose how you become, and that requires you as the individual to continue to stay curious and stay kind, stay grounded in perspective, and let yourself be like let yourself feel shit, man. Like you know don't rush to find the answers. Don't let the noise of society drown you out. Like at the end of the day, like I told you earlier, like you know don't take life so seriously. Like everything's gonna be okay, and when it's not, you'll find a way to be, right? Like that's the mindset I think I try to carry today. Like I don't try to live in regret. I try to focus as much on the future as I can. What you do, how you want to grow, the life you want to create. Like that's where everyone's energy should be. And I think if people can be a little bit more present in that respect, I think everyone will be a lot happier and people would be able to to get through this life a lot better. And I will say the one last thing too is I think we all make mistakes and we've all done bad things. We've all, I think, in my opinion, I think humans are like very imperfect beings, and we've all said something to someone that we regret. We've all hurt people. We've all done bad things. But at the end of the day, like I don't think that defines us. I don't think that those things can should define you. And even if it's later in life, as long as you can eventually get to the point where you're happy with who you are and you've made the effort to become better, and that's really all that matters. And yeah, that's how I try to that's what I would tell myself
yeah.
if I went back in time. So
No, I love that, man. Thank you. And I think as I'm like writing these questions, writing and sending them out, I was reflecting kind of on myself. And I think for me, my biggest thing, if I can go back to my younger self, would be just similar to you, like not change, right? Because obviously my impact of life has kind of, my walk of life, if you will, has impacted me and shaped me for who I am today. But the one thing I would say is be more present. I think kind of to what I alluded earlier about like chasing that next thing, right? That's great and all, but like that next thing is going to come regardless, right? With time, and I think there were times in my life where I reflect back and I wish I could have been more present, even as a little kid, right? Or at college, right? Or you name it, right? Just be more present. Because those are things in life like you'll never get back, man. Like that time you'll never get back. There's this guy I
yeah,
follow on Instagram, and motivational speaker, and he's like the biggest thing in life that is you can never buy back is your time. You can never buy back time, right?
yeah,
And that reflected on me, right? I'm like, hey, like I'm 33 now, right? I can't buy back my 20s, right? I can't buy back my childhood, so like I have to live with that, but also leverage that now for the future, man, right? And think about that
yeah.
hard, reflect on it, and say, hey, like life's life, life's happened, life's full of ups and downs, but I can only control what's moving forward, right? So yeah, But listen, man, I obviously words can't describe how appreciative I am. You coming on, man, sharing your experiences, your vulnerabilities. I mean, it goes without saying, man. I love you, dude. I'm thankful for you to be here. Thankful for you to join this. I mean, it's crazy how our lives have been the last 15 years, and the 4 years of fuckery, if you will, up in Vermont, to say the least. I think that's like the encapsulating word. But yeah, man, thank you. Obviously, this is gonna be up soon. I'm gonna have it on Spotify, Apple, and then also YouTube, right in the video perspective. So yeah, I'll have it at Real Talk Laz. So again, I appreciate you and appreciate everyone listening to this. And I think my closing statement is like, no one's alone here. So if you feel something, say something. Don't wait till it's too long, because all you'll have is just a memory of the what if I did this or what if I could have done this differently, and that weighs a lot heavier than you think, man.
Yeah, yeah, dude. I appreciate you having me on, and um, yeah, we all we're all we're all just memories to other people, right? So,
Yeah,
for you and I, we've been friends for a long time, and I want to continue to be friends in the future for forever and ever, man. Like
yeah,
that's what it's about, right? Like continue to build those memories and like forge those relationships. So, don't be a memory to someone else. Be present,
that's right.
and that requires all of us to to open up.
Yeah, 100%, man.